Parshas Emor, this week's share is sponsored anonymously. It should be a schus for the whole mishpacha. This week is the Parsha of the Yomim Tovim. The Torah describes the different moyadei Hashana. But before the Torah describes the moyadim, the Parsha first gives us some halachas regarding korbanos and kahuna. And what's interesting to note, and this is asked by different mefarshim, Baron Kotler amongst others, is when we actually lane the Parsha on Pesach and Sukkot, we don't begin from the aliyah of Revi'i, of Vaidab Hashem, Moedei Hashem, which is where the Parsha actually begins to talk about the Moedim in detail, which you might imagine is the right place to start. But we start from the Psukim just prior to that. Shoir, oy kesev, oy eis, ki yivolid. Right? An ox, a sheep, or a goat when it's born, and then there's halachas that we detail, such as waiting until the 8th day, until you're giving it as a korban, not to offer as a korban on the same day an animal and its offspring, etc., etc. And it's these few psukim that is where we begin when we lane the Parsha of Moyadim on a Moyed, on a Yom Tov. So the central question I want to explain today is, why is that integral? Why is it that we start Parshas HaMoyadim with these few psukim first? And in case you're thinking of this as a very small and technical question, I want to assure you that tonight, Be'ezah Hashem, we're going to discover and uncover some really far-reaching yesodus from this very Parsha. If you've never heard of this, what we're going to talk about tonight, it potentially will blow your mind. We're going to base everything on the following Medrash. Sorry, I forgot to say, I did bring source sheets this week because I'm going to be quoting a fair bit on the Bima. We're going to be basing everything on the Medrash. For those who are listening or watching, by all means, you can email me and I will provide you a source sheet from which we'll be quoting. The Medrash Tanchuma, Emor Zayin, but it's a Medrash elsewhere as well. The Medrash says as follows: Rav Tanchuma opened up with the following pasuk based on pasuk in Eov. Well, the pasuk in Eov, Mi hiktimani va'ashalim, which means, who is going to come before me and I will pay them. Omar Reb Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Asida baskoil lihyois mefoitzetzes paroshei hahorim va'imeres. In the future, there will be a baskoil that will be shouting, will be announcing from the tops of the mountains, and say as follows: Kol misha po'al im kail, whoever has worked with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yovoi v'yitol schora, you should come and take schar. And the Ruach HaKodesh then shouts out, Mi hiktimani v'ashalim. This loshon of hiktimani is Rebbeinu Shalom saying, who can come before me and I will pay them. And the Medrash goes on to explain, what does it mean coming before? The Medrash says as follows: Mi kiles lefonai, who praised me, says Hashem, ad shelo nasati bo neshama, before I actually gave them the neshama to enable them to do so. Mi mol lefonai, ad shelo nasati ben zacha, who did milah before I gave them a son they were able to do it with. Mi osa lefonai tzitzis, ad shelo nasati betalis, who's done the mitzvah tzitzis before I gave them a talis. And as you can imagine, the Medrash goes on with these questions. And finally, the Medrash says, Mi hikrev lefonai korban, who would offer before me a korban, actually a behema, before I give them a behema. And the Medrash finishes off, Heve shoyre kesev vayes. So the Medrash ends off connecting it to these psukim, shoyre kesev vayes, but the Medrash seems to be astonishing. It's what we call a Medrash pliya. What is the Medrash essentially saying? The Medrash is saying that anyone who's done, I have some source sheets on the beam if you want. Anyone who's done a mitzvah, essentially, has done something for Hashem, should come and get the reward. But then the Baskoil details that with every action that you might come forward and say, oh, we did a mitzvah, we did tzitzis, we did a korban. It's almost like the Medrash is ridiculing you for thinking that you actually did anything. What, you really did tzitzis? Who gave you the beged tzitzis upon which you put the tzitzis? You really brought a korban? Who gave you the behema with which you bring a korban? So what's this about? What's the Medrash trying to imply? That we shouldn't get reward for mitzvahs? Because Hashem's ultimately doing it all? And also, how does it tie in? And why is it even relevant to the pasuk of Shoir, or Kesev, or Eiz? Why is that even relevant? So let's answer the second question first, because it's an easier question to answer. This Yosef says that the Medrash is bothered by the wording of the pasuk. It would make sense to say Kesev or Eiz ki yivoles, because a sheep or a goat, when it is born, is also called a sheep or a goat. As a young sheep, it's a sheep, and a young goat, a goat. But a young shoir is actually an egel. A young ox is actually a calf called an egel. So it doesn't actually work in the pasuk to say shoir, etc., ki yivole, an ox when it is born. It's not supposed to be an ox when it is born. It's supposed to be an egel when it is born. That's what the Eitz says the Medrash is bothered by. And you know what the Eitz says, chat? The central message of the Medrash, which we will break down and explain more, but the central message of the Medrash is that when you bring a carbon, don't get all carried away and proud that you brought a carbon to Hashem, because ultimately you were only able to bring the carbon because Hashem enabled you to bring it. And that Medrash is true whether you're bringing a kesev, eiz, or whether you're bringing a shor. It doesn't matter the fact that you're talking about a newborn or you're talking about a fully grown. Whatever you're bringing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash wants to point out, you're bringing to Hashem only because He enabled you to bring it. That's how the Yosef explains. It's the discrepancy in language that leads the Medrash to say there must be a universal vort here that the Torah is implying with these words, which, as I say, the Medrash goes on to explain, and we're going to, Be'ez Hashem, provide more depth, more understanding of the depth of the Medrash. So I want to draw it out a bit and talk to a Yesod which will provide the framework and the background to understanding this Medrash fully. Look, we're all maminim, right? We all believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We all have bitachon to a degree. We all agree that nothing in this world ever happens without HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns the world. Everyone knows that. A child from school knows that. Says the Kaddish Kemach, bitachon hey. The idea of bitachon is that a person should completely and totally depend everything on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he should realize v'sheyis boinen ki ein hamaisa hahu mosor b'yodoi elo b'rtzoinoi. He should realize that there is no single action that he can take without HaKadosh Baruch Hu willing it to happen. And in case you weren't sure what he meant with that, he continues. There's many people, says the Kaddish Kemach, who believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu bichlal. They agree and they believe everything is in the hands of Hashem. When it gets to the detail of life, that's where people struggle to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the detail of life. Rotzoloi says the Kaddish Kemach. Whatever action a person takes, whatever direction a person travels in, it is completely and totally HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As he quotes, B'chol derochecha da'ehu. And if you still weren't sure what he meant, he ends off the paragraph, She'ein lecha koyach v'yechoyles b'pe'ula hahi, ve'ein asiyosa masur lecha ki im biyad Hashem. You have absolutely no agency, you have no ability to pull off any action at all without HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually making it happen. Givaldik. That's bitachon. Bitachon is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of the world, and you can do nothing without him, including mitzvahs. Hang on a second. Including mitzvahs? So what are we doing? We can't do anything without HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is literally the force behind every action we do, including Maaseh mitzvah. So what is a mitzvah? What does it mean to do a mitzvah? You're not doing anything. Hashem's doing it. And why should we get schar for doing a mitzvah? What are you doing? It's like the guy in the puppet show who's doing all the puppets. Are you going to give money to the puppets for the show? It's the puppet master who you should be giving money to. What's going on? So we have to understand what it means that we get reward for mitzvahs. So in this world that we live in, we see payment as a transactional reward. And I'll give you an example, right? You do a job for someone, They pay you, hopefully. What happens if you take a brush and you start sweeping the streets outside your house? You sweep the whole street beautifully, remove all the leaves and from top to bottom. Did a good job. And then you turn up to the council and you say, I swept the street, please can I be paid? What would the council say to you? It's very nice. They might, if they're nice, they'll say thank you very much. But actually, we didn't need you sweeping the streets. We didn't ask you to sweep the streets because we have our own sweep cleaners, apparently. Apparently. But the point is, no payment is due. Thank you very much, but no thanks. Everybody knows this, right? We all understand that. We can all see the sense in that. The mistake is to think that our schar for mitzvahs also works in that normal, so to speak, in our world, way of payment. That we do mitzvahs for Hashem, and Hashem, in return, gives us payment. He gives us reward. The problem with that understanding is, well, it's wrong, but the problem with it is, Hashem doesn't need our mitzvahs. We don't do mitzvahs for Hashem, so to speak, to gain. We do mitzvahs for us to gain. Now, don't confuse this with doing mitzvahs Shalom Lishma. I'm not saying we don't do mitzvahs in service of Hashem. Of course we serve Hashem. Of course we shouldn't do mitzvahs for our own selfish interest. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the purpose behind the Torah mitzvahs, and we're going to bring some sources, but there's many sources across Chazal that say this point, but the purpose of Torah and mitzvahs is for us to improve our spiritual standing, for us to become closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not for Hashem, it's for us, for our gain. Medrash Tanchuma, in the conversation between Tunas Rufus, Arasha, and Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says, Lo nosna HaKadosh Baruch Hu et ha-mitzvahs li-Yisrael elo tzarif oisam bohem, Tazriah Hey. Medrash Tanchuma says, the purpose of the mitzvahs being given to Klal Yisrael is for them to purify themselves. There's a similar Medrash in Shmini. The Rambam, Mo Nevuchim, Chelek Gimel Chav Zayin, Shtei Ma'atoris HaTorah, there's two purposes in Torah. The purpose of the Torah is Tikkun HaNefesh and Tikkun HaGuf. Again, perfection of the nefesh, of the soul, and perfection of the guf. The Dubno Magid, Oil Yaakov in Parshas Yisroi, brings from Kadmoinim that the tachlis and mitzvah is levarir or lezachech nefesh emunosenu. The purpose of mitzvahs is for us to purify ourselves and for us to be mevarer, divide between a good kite and a good way of behaving versus not. And by doing mitzvahs, the Dubno Magid goes on to say, again he's quoting from Kadmonim, by doing mitzvahs, we become better people, and the mitzvahs that we have become improved as a result. So Torah and mitzvahs is not for Hashem's sake in that, it's not to give Hashem anything. Hashem doesn't need our sukkah. Hashem doesn't need our tzitzis. Hashem doesn't need our Shabbos. But Hashem created opportunities for us to grow through mitzvahs by serving Hashem in this way. Fine. We know how sechar doesn't work. It doesn't work that we're fulfilling a need and therefore we're paid in return, like it works in this world. Because we're not filling any need. Hashem doesn't need it. So it can't be that the payment is a payment for our need. Okay, we get that. But what are we doing? The Medrash, the Kadakemach laid out Bitochen so clearly before that everything that we do is only because Hashem wills it, because Hashem enables it to happen. So what part are we playing? What are we doing even that should enable us to deserve schar? So I want to quote for you from the Chovis Alvavos. Chovis Alvavos Shar B'tochen Perek Dalet. If you're here for Mincha is 1:45.
No.
Okay, you're welcome to stay. Shar B'tochen Perek Dalet. And he says the following, that in every action of a mitzvah, there's three parts. Number one, shaliboy umatspunoy yivchar ba'isa pu'ula. One's heart and one's focus must choose to do that action. Number two, sheyachlit v'yizboynein la'asos es ha'pu'ula shabachar bo. That he should actively choose. He should decide within himself that he's going to go ahead and do that action. And the third part is to actually go ahead and do it, to actualize his desire. Says the Chovis Alvavos, regarding the first two parts, that's totally in our hands. The Bechira And by the way, Bechira doesn't mean some fanciful choice. Like the guy who's lying in bed at night and says, oh, I wish I could learn all night and learn the whole of Shas, but I also want my 8 hours sleep. That's not wishing anything. That's not Bechira. Bechira, as the Chovos HaLevavos defines it, is really wanting and desiring something and urging yourself and moving towards that direction with as much as you can muster of yourself and really showing and demonstrating that you want it. That's called Bechira, okay? That part is in our hands. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, as the Chovos HaLevavos says, U'bacharta b'chaim. Hashem gave us the choice to choose. Says the Chovos HaLevavos, but the last part, the actualization of your desire, that's in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands. Hashem did not give us the ability to actually perform. It is dependent on factors that are not in our control. Sometimes a person will be able to achieve his aim and sometimes he won't. And the Chovos HaLevavos continues by this shtickle by explaining, and the schar that we get for mitzvahs is for the initial 2 stages. It's for the choice that we make to do the mitzvah, not for actually performing the mitzvah, because that isn't our choice. That's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's the build-up towards that. It's the idea that the person commits themselves to doing the mitzvah. That's what he gets schar for. It's that choice. And it's that bechira, it's that choice of right over wrong that enabled us to grow and become better people. We spoke before, we said a minute ago, how Torah and mitzvahs is there for us to be mazachich, for us to be mitzaref, for us to purify ourselves, for us to become better people. If you're a person who is consistently making moral choices of good over bad, of good over evil, of doing the right thing rather than the wrong thing, making those choices and pointing yourself in that direction of living such a life, such a meaningful life, that is what makes you grow and makes you change and makes you become a more spiritual person. And that is what he gets schar for. So what we've established is we don't actually do mitzvahs on our own volition. We get to choose, to want, to desire, to look in the direction of doing mitzvahs, and Hashem enables the action if we're zocher. Number 2, we've also said that choosing to do mitzvahs is the point of our growth. That is at the point of which a person grows from Bechira. And the third thing we said is the schar that a person gets is not for doing the mitzvah, but it's for wanting to do the mitzvah. Now let's come back to that Medrash Tanchuma that we began with, that we said was so astonishing. The Medrash described the bas koil. The bas koil announces, Kol mi shepo'al im keil yovoy v'yitol schori, which translates, whoever has worked with Hashem should come and take reward. Says Rav Aaron Kotler, Mishnah of Aaron. The Beiteach understands that nothing ever happens without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even our mitzvahs. Like we just laid out, first from the Kadakemach, and then with the Chovos HaLevavos, we laid it out. We don't do mitzvahs. A Beiteach understands, HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables our mitzvahs to actualize. Says Rav Aaron Kotler further, the Beiteach understands that all they need to do, as the Chovos HaLevavos said, all they need to do is choose. Look in the direction and move and do your utmost to move in the direction of doing good, of choosing good. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will actualize our desire. Note the expression of the bas koil, Shepo'al im keil. Who has done with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's a partnership. When we do a mitzvah, it's a combination of our desire and HaKadosh Baruch Hu actualizing our desire. Together with Hashem Kaviyachal. That's the opening statement. Who has done work of mitzvahs with HaKadosh Baruch Hu by providing the desire for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to actualize. It's not about who did Ma'aseh Mitzvah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides what actions happen in this world. There's no credit for doing something because Hashem decided it should happen. There's a credit to choosing to do something. And that's the pshat in the Lashon. Mi hikdimani va'ashalim. Who came before me How is it possible to get before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The part that's before HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the choice behind the action. If you choose to do something, that's in your part. That's the part you can do. And only then HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in to actualize your choice. It says, Mi hikdimani, who came before me, meaning to refer to people who choose to do the right thing. And those people can be zeicha to schar. Why? Because of their bechira. That is the pshat in the Medrash Tanchuma. And before I answer our question, I just want to make clear what we've said, because I think it's an entirely new way of looking at life, of looking at a life of Torah mitzvahs. Because first of all, what this understanding does is it takes away the pressure that sometimes people feel of success versus failure. And I'm not talking about the success in the world at large. I'm talking about success in Yiddishkeit. People take on projects. People try and do Torah, Chesed. People have set aims for themselves. Hopefully, if a person is growing, a person is trying, people set aims and goals for themselves. What this understanding that we've laid out today does is it takes away the pressure of success. It's not in your hands anyway. Now, does that mean I shouldn't bother? Of course not. Of course you should continue to try, because trying shows where your heart is. If you try and learn your Masechta, if you try and take on the chesed that you want to do, you try and behave well, you try and do the right thing. By trying to do the right thing, you're showing where your choice of your heart is. But as to whether you succeed in the end, not in your hands. Totally not in your hands. It's in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands. So that's first of all. The second thing, though, that I think is so valuable and a game changer with this understanding is that we start to see life as a partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it truly is. Whatever we're doing with Hashem. We are choosing, we are desiring, and Hashem is actualizing. Our whole life, our whole existence of Torah mitzvahs is Pa'alim Keil. It's working as a partnership, as it were, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every time we do a mitzvah, we're doing it with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, we asked a question. Although in Parshas Emor we have the Parsha of the Moyadim, when we lay in the Parsha of Moyadim on Yom Tov, we preface the Parsha with psukim of Shoir, Oikesev, Oyez, Ki Yivoled, which are halachas regarding korban. And we asked from the Parshim, why is that the case? Why do we begin the Parsha of Moyadim with this introduction? So I want to suggest, based on what we've been saying, pshat in the Medrash Tanchuma that elaborates based on that pasuk of Shoir, Oikesev, Oyez, we read these psukim before Yom Tov because within these psukim carries a fundamental perspective that's required for keeping Moyadim, for keeping Yom Tov. First of all, purely for those who are Oile Regel. We know for Yom Tov, Shalosh Regalim, we were Oile Regel. We went up to Yerushalayim. Do you know what it means to be Oile Regel? Do you know how much emunah bitachon you needed to have to leave everything behind, unguarded, because there were no menfolk around? Leave your livelihood, leave everything, and travel up to Yerushalayim. Without bitachon, it would not be possible to be Oile Regel. So before Parshas Moyadim, we want to talk of the psukim, as I say, which the Medrash expounds on, Shoir Kesav Oyez, which, as we said, within the Medrash lies the Yesod, and the Medrash spells it out, that is never about us. Everything that happens in this world is Kulei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Before we talk of Yom Tov, before we're Oile Regel, as it were, let's just remember and focus on the principle of bitachon. There's a second point here. The second point is relevant to all of us, not just when the Beis HaMikdash is here, b'mheira, we should be zeicha to Oile Regel. Rav Aaron Kotler makes this point in his words as he brings his Medrash. A life of bitachon is a life of living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your life. There is no other way of living life with Hashem. As Yidden, we all want to live with Hashem. If you want to live with Hashem, you need to live with bitachon. And living with bitachon from a place of insight, from a place of calmness, from a place of genuine realization, genuine seeing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. He's even in charge of my Maisa Mitzvah. Hashem's in charge of everything. And if a person strengthens themselves in that perspective, they will be zoicha, their reward, their experience of life will be one of living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their midst. Yom Tov is a gewaldige time. Yom Tov is a zman mesugel for growth within the theme of the Yom Tov. Pesach Emunah, right? Shavuos Matan Torah, etc. It's a time, Yom Tov is a time to connect more with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No? You want to connect more with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The first brick of that building block is bitachon. As an introduction to Parshas HaMoyadim, we read the Parsha of Shoyer Kesev Vayezki Voled because of the lesson that the Medrash drives home based on that pasuk. There is no growth in spirituality. There is no closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without emunah and bitachon pulsating through our veins, without really, genuinely living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Surrendering to Him, leaning on Him. Realize the truth. If you want success in Avodas Hashem, if you want success in life, you need to see the truth for what it is. It's not in our hands. And all we're left to do is try to work with HaKadosh Baruch Hu kaviyachol by wanting the right thing. You want the right thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will ensure that you're zoicha. But this perspective, Rabbi Yisai, is so helpful going into Yom Tov, because we know what we need to focus on to get out of the Yom Tov. In order to draw from the Yom Tov, the Skulas Hazman, we want to focus on, of course, living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that means focusing on a life with bitachon. And by the way, growth in bitachon is also one of those spiritual acquisitions that requires Hashkochas Hashem. You want to grow in bitachon, it also depends on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what you can do is you can put yourself in the right direction. You can want it with all your heart and soul. If you come into Yom Tov with that type of tzimoyin, that type of thirst, that type of drive, that type of desire to grow with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu more and more, may we be zeicha that if we come to Yom Tov in that fashion, we'll be zeicha to all the skulais and the wonderful brachas that Yom Tov can bring us in our spiritual growth and beyond.